Hello, and welcome to position 12 of my Complete Chess Endings course. Here we're still in the king and pawn endings, and we're going to go through this position which covers the opposition, as well as advancing your pawns when you have a one pawn advantage. So in this specific position with white to move, which is what we'll look at first, it's a win. Black to move is actually a draw, because black is able to get in front of white's pawns and get over to the corner here. And now this is an important point, is that a rook pawn is very hard to win if it's just a white rook pawn and a king versus the king if the opposing king can get into the corner, because there's no way to drive out the king. But anyway, we'll look at that when we look at the black side. But for white, what he wants to do is try to outflank black and either win or trade the pawn, preferably keeping it on the g file. So he'll first advance his king. Now if black tries to play the most forcing move to bring his king forward to try to keep white out, then eventually white will just outflank him by advancing his pawn. Now white is forced to either advance his pawn. For example, if he plays h5, then we'll just play g5, and eventually we're going to outflank black and win his pawn for nothing. Now, of course, two pawn advantage is easily winning, but we'll just play it out. White can just simply advance his pawn and his king, and there's really nothing that black can do. Alright, so what if black plays knight to e6, which it's not really tricky because white will just simply outflank him anyway, but it's a little less clear cut. White will just simply move his king forward again, and he'll try to outflank black. Now notice that with this move, he's trying to go around. He cuts off the f6 square from black, so black is forced to move back. And that's what we want. That's what outflanking is basically just using your king to control squares so that the opposing king can't move there, and then you'll gain access to one of the squares. For example, the white king is covering these three squares. So if he controls a square and he's in front of black, then black will be forced to step aside and give up control of one square. So as you can see, that's what he does here. Now black is forced to move here, and white can either outflank him again, such as king to e6. Now here, the computer recommends, a very tactical line where he gives up a pawn, but he gains, or actually he just trades a pawn. So white could continue outflanking black by moving here and then just eventually trading this pawn. But here, the computer recommends that we check black. Now black will win this pawn, but we're able to actually outflank by winning this pawn and then ushering our rook pawn in. Now notice this wins because the black king is in the totally wrong position. He's not in the corner here to stop this pawn. And white controls all these squares. So white would just simply usher in his pawn, and there's nothing black can do. So from the initial position, we can see that the idea is quite simple. It's basically just pushing your pawns when you have an advantage, but also keeping in mind to prevent black from gaining control of the rook corner. And you definitely don't want to just simply push your pawns and trade, because that would be a huge mistake, because then you'd have to allow black to get in the corner, which would stop you from queening your pawn. Alright, we're going to look at the black side of this position now. Alright, with black to move, this is basically, well, we're looking at it from the black side, but it's the same position, but this is basically the meat of this study position. Now, of course, this isn't just a study position. These simple endings happen all the time, especially as we go on to more complicated ones. But the simple endings happen quite frequently and definitely in time trouble. So the main idea in this position is illustrated when black is able to prevent white from outflanking him and then bringing his king to the rook corner. So from this position, you just want to remember that rook pawns are very drawish, because if the king can get over to the corner, then there's no way to force with just a king the black king out of the corner. And we'll see that happen here. So black, he could either start by bringing his king in to prevent a white from outflanking him and then bringing his king back to the corner. But here he starts by just advancing his pawn, which prevents white from advancing his own pawn. So as you can see, he's already started on his path to the rook corner. Now white, in order to make progress, has to try to exchange pawns, but now he's left with a rook pawn. And you can see black has begun his journey, and there's nothing white can do about it. Even if he brings his king in, black will just follow along this path. And now he could just go back, or he could just play king to h7. But otherwise, black will just shuffle among these three squares. And it's a draw because of this. Now notice that if he checks, then white is forced to either step away from the pawn, allowing black to take it, or if he wants to hang on to his pawn, then it's a stalemate. Alright, so we'll go from this initial position. So just, keep in mind that the main idea in this position is you want to prevent having a rook pawn against two lone kings, or just a lone king from your side, because they're very drawish. So the reason you want to learn these simple positions is if you have a more complicated position, and you can see that you'd end up with two pawns, you can calculate that you'd evaluate that you'd have two pawns, which would be a pawn advantage, but is it really an advantage if you end up with a rook pawn only? Because it's very drawish. And you'll notice that very strong players a lot of times don't play these types of positions because they know the simple endings so well, and as should you, because they're very tactical as well in terms of your calculation ability. You'll notice that we played 10 moves deep here, and you should be able to calculate it all in your head from this initial position, because it's actually quite simple, the moves. It's just king moves, visualizing these. You can see that's 4 moves. So I would recommend that you pause these positions and calculate them in your head as well. It'll definitely improve your tactics. Alright, I'll see you in position 13.